UTBA bee calendar for Toronto and the GTA is available for you. It's 24 pages of lovely colored pictures and information about what you need to do either indoors in the wintertime or to prepare or in the apiary. It also has some amazing information on climate data for Toronto and GTA. And we also put in what flowers would be blooming every month, so as well as lovely pictures. The final page of the calendar gives information about urban beekeeping and also references about beekeeping videos where you can find them, blogs and websites and book. It is a very valuable resource for beekeepers, and it's very easy for you to obtain a copy. The calendar is posted on the UTBA website under Beekeeping Resources and can be downloaded free of charge. And every paid-up UTBA member is eligible to get a free printed copy of the calendar. And to arrange the shipping of the calendar, please contact Alin, and I have put his email address there, so that you can contact him. Now, just one second here. So the online references for this presentation, I always, when I do education, make sure that I have solid references. And just to list them out, MAFRA's website has essential practices for beekeepers in Ontario. The Ontario Beekeepers Association has really great fact sheets. OBA also has Guide to Feeding Bees. There's information there on that site also about oxalic acid treatment protocol, and I'll talk about that very briefly later. It's not the time to do that. And about the Ontario Animal Health Network. The other thing that's really helpful for new beekeepers, or just to refresh, is the University of Guelph's honeybee research videos and other resources for beekeepers. And of course, some hard copy books to have on your shelf. Dewey Caron's Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping, Story's Guide to Beekeeping, and also the tech transfer manuals. They're excellent. So it's September in the bee yard, and it's almost unbelievable that we are going to be talking about starting to prepare your bees for winter. But when I looked at the OMAFRA report for 2021, I thought it was very sort of revealing as to what we needed to do to prepare our bees. The OMAFRA report says some of the most common causes of the colony losses last year were weak colonies, ineffective varroa mites, poor queens, and starvation and winter. And I've included the website that you can take a really good look at it. I've just done the high level list of things. So start to get your beekeepers ready for winter now. Inspect your hives to ensure that the hives are strong and that the queen is strong, and consider combining weak hives and review your notes and records, hopefully that you've kept throughout the year, to determine the trends of mite levels and the weight of the hives and other observations that you've made. Remember, September, remember that varroa mite in September, the more bees you have in that hive, the more varroa mites you're going to have. And the OBA typically says that you would have, when you're doing your testing, either the alcohol wash, you would have 3 mites per 100, or 9 mites for 300 bees, or the sticky board is 12 mites on the sticky board. So when you do watch for drops of your mites if you do treatments. Always follow the manufacturer's safety precautions and carefully apply the treatments. And remember, I know there's common questions that are coming out on some Facebook pages. What about oxalic acid? Oxalic acid is not applied now. It is applied when the brood rearing season has ceased. And the OBA fact sheet is really an excellent resource for oxalic acid applications. So just to review again, varroa mite education, lots of helpful resources for you from the Ontario Beekeepers Association, understanding the impact of the mites, varroa mite population dynamics and monitoring, varroa mite treatment procedures, timing and modes, and pest and disease resistant behavior in bees. As well, there's some great articles out there that have come out. Is it a varroa mite or is it crud? And it's a guide to really, when you're looking at your mites, what are they? Is it crud or is it really a mite? And Paul Kozak, the chief apiarist for Ontario, and Melanie Kempers of the OBA have put that together. It's a PDF document, again, excellent, as well as Now or Never, late season colony management. Hopefully throughout the season, you have been monitoring your mites and you have been doing the testing and you've been doing treatment as required, but it also highlights the legally registered treatments for varroa mites in Ontario. And that's from the Ontario Health Network in partnership with the OBA. And you can also watch the Ontario Health Network's OBA instructional videos on alcohol wash and sticky board. Now, the Ontario Varroa Mite Monitoring Campaign 2022 is in partnership with the Ontario Health Network. And all beekeepers, regardless of their experience or number of hives, are encouraged to contribute this data. The OVMC depends on participation of as many beekeepers as possible. The more beekeepers we have monitoring mites, the more data there will be on varroa levels in Ontario, and the better prepared we will all be for dealing with them and maintaining a healthy colonies. The login system is quick and it's easy to use and is customized either for commercial or smaller operations. Logging the mite levels can be done from anywhere. You just log in, and beekeepers are encouraged to monitor and log those results throughout the season, including before and after treatments. And this will allow them to assess the efficiency of the treatment. The website was not open earlier. It is open now. It's a very easy thing to put your data in and fill in the survey. And at the end of the campaign, it'll be great because we'll be able to see what the status of the mites are in Ontario for our colonies. And remember that we did have speakers about mites and how the mites weaken the bees and how a lot of the problem is or give them disease. And so we hope that we get our mites under control for sure. The other thing that's really important at this time of year is to check the hive weights to determine if they have enough winter stores. Both AMAFRA and the OBA say that at least a single hive should weigh 70 to 90 pounds at 100 to 120 pounds for a double hive. Hives should be very difficult to lift. Colonies need that ample food storage to meet their requirements for the cluster. The timing of the feeding is important. It should occur after harvesting the supers, however, not too early because you need to leave space for the winter bees. And the bees also need time to transport and cure that feed before the winter, and the temperature must be above the 10 degrees so that they can do that. And Janine McGowan, who is with us this evening, will be talking much more about feeding, but there also is a really good resource on the OBA website, the guide feeding, and I have included that in the presentation. The other thing is that if it's possible, after you've extracted your honey, could you freeze the frames to kill the wax moth larvae? Inspect your winter wraps or other winter insulation to see if they're okay for this winter. Order the materials if required. Gather up your entrance reducers and your mouse guards, get everything together. Ensure your bear fence is working and maintained. That should be done all through the year. Bears are getting much more prominent in Ontario, even all over the place, as their territory is being disrupted because of construction. So they are on the move. And clean and tidy the bee yard, your shed, your honey house. And a very interesting program that's come across. It's been around for a while, but it's also now including bees. It's the Clean Farm program. And if you have used miticide strips, expired treatments, unused bee medications, this program, you can take them to certain locations, either in Southern Ontario or Northern Ontario in the September timeframe, and I've given you the dates there. And if you want more information on that, please take a look at the cleanfarmprogram.ca. And this is the hope to keep all of that out of landfill and be properly, just like when you turn medications into the pharmacy, properly disposed of. The Selling Food in Ontario workshops is organized by OMAFRA. It's upcoming this month with respect to, it caters to local farmers and food entrepreneurs. The workshops are marketing channel opportunities, the business of bees, costing and pricing, consumer trends and marketing approaches, and getting the product off the shelf. And if you're interested, OMAFRA has a really good website with more information. And the sessions are 7 to 8 o'clock via Zoom, and you can take one session or you can take all 4. And last but not least, the Ontario Beekeepers Association annual general meeting will be in Kingston on November 18th and 19th. Stay tuned for more information on the meeting agenda and the speakers and the topics. And that's the end of my presentation for this evening.
Wow. Thanks, Marion. That was really in-depth. Terrific. Okay, we're moving on to our Big Educated portion of our meeting, and we're happy to have Janine McGowan here to talk to us about feeding, which is what we need to start thinking about seriously right now.
So we got to Janine, you can go ahead. Oh, you're not going to be sharing your screen, so we need to maybe pin Janine.
Yeah, so I'll just start out with a really brief introduction. I'm going to try to keep this to when should I be finished? 7:15, maybe?
Sure.
Okay. So my name is Janine McGowan, and I am a honeybee research center at the University of Guelph Bee Lab brat, is what I've been called. I call myself that. So I apprenticed under Paul Kelly for 6 years. I did a master's degree on Nosema ceranae with Dr. Ernesto Guzman. And I just worked, lived, breathed, studied apiculture for quite a while. And then when I finished my master's, I kind of had some interest in pursuing a PhD, but then I actually continued in just kind of working for commercial beekeepers. And now I actually have the pleasure of running my own community apiary, which I think is a really great idea. I'm not to say that I came up with it myself, but I really only have found 2 other examples. One's out west and one's near Port Perry. And so I want to demystify the whole, idea of beekeeping. And I actually really do just want to provide the mentorship that Paul Kelly provided me. Because honestly, it was just 6 years of absolute wonder working under my bee sensei. And I really just wanted to actually pass that experience along to other people. I think we can actually keep bees together. We all don't necessarily have to do it separately either. And then of course, under my guidance, I would reckon that a community apiary would then, be less of a biohazard. There'd be probably less mite bombs or mistakes being made. I digress. So I'm here to talk about feeding. I didn't have the chance to prepare a PowerPoint directly on this subject. I actually have 2 other PowerPoints. So I have about a 2-hour worth PowerPoint about beekeeping 101. It covers just setup, equipment, all the bee products, and preserving wild pollinator habitats as well, because that's actually very dear to my heart. The other bee presentation I have is actually to try to kind of entice the farmers, because I'm actually up in Grey County in Eugenia. I really do try to entice the farmers to actually start growing cover crops when they actually need to rest their soil, meaning like they actually need to put nitrogen back in the soil. That's usually with the process of cover cropping. And for me, I've actually hand selected at least 5 different crops that farmers can put in that doesn't just let the field sit fallow, but it actually allows for a honey crop to to be provided. So it's not like you're not making any money off of that field. And I think it's just a really good connection that can be made. So that's what I do up here in Grey County. And so because I don't have a PowerPoint per se, I think we can actually make this the most efficient by just me answering questions. Like, you are all sitting here, instead of me kind of buckshotting a whole bunch of information that maybe not be pertinent to you. I'm here actually to answer some questions for the next 20 minutes or so. So fire away.
Maybe we'll ask the people who are participating by Zoom to use the chat to do that. It will probably be easier if you did that, and then I can just close this down.
And so if there's no direct questions just yet, I might be jumping the gun and not giving people enough time.
I can ask you one, Janine. Can you talk about the difference in the concentration of sugar, like when we should be feeding what concentration?
When are we doing 1 to 1? When are we doing 2 to 1? And what would be the distinguishing timeline between when you would switch from 1 to 1 to 2 to 1?
Yeah, so a very easy kind of just thing to remember is that 1 to 1 is best for the spring. 2 to 1 is best for the fall. And so the 2 to 1 ratio that is actually available now, or that you should be considering to make, is actually really hard to make in your home. So don't feel bad if you don't get it perfectly. The 2 to 1 ratio to sugar to water is actually more of a commercial success. They force the process because, quite honestly, you can't actually fit the solid sugar into that ratio of water without actually doing it in more of a mechanical fashion. So what you can do is, I've actually got the ratio here. I'm just going to make it really straight and simple for everyone. To make a roughly a 2 to 1 ratio, you can actually then try to dissolve. Okay, so what you're going to do, because most of the sugar that we buy, if I'm not mistaken, most of the sugar that you buy is in the 2 kilogram packages, right?
Yeah.
So that is your standard weight that you're going to be starting out with. So that is then where I'm going to start from, because it just makes it easy. So try to, when you're making a 2 to 1 ratio, you have 1 2 kilogram packet, okay? And try to actually match that, try to dissolve that in about 5.5 cups of water. So 1 2 kilogram package, try to dissolve that in about 5.5 cups of water.
1.2 liters. Is that 1.2 liters?
You'd have
About 1,200 mils?
make like, if for most measuring cups, they actually do have a milliliter to liter ratio as well. I just decided to do cups because I just have a really big measuring cup. So yeah, you can convert that however you'd like. So yeah, it's usually 5.5 cups of water per 1 2 kilogram packet of sugar. So the trick that you actually have to do as well is that you heat the water first. So you get that water almost completely, almost in a rolling boil. And it's actually really important that you don't just dump the package of sugar in all at once. The idea is that you're trying to actually fill the water molecule spaces up as much as you can with this sucrose, these sucrose molecules, which are actually just as big as water molecules. So what you'd want to do, and honestly, use a really big pot, okay? Because the actual weight of the sugar, you're adding 2 kilograms, that's going to make your water level rise significantly, because you're literally adding 2 kilos of a solid into a liquid that then you're expecting to dissolve. So do it in a really big pot, get your water almost at a rolling boil, and then add, I would say, 1/4 of a package at a time. Stir vigorously until the water's actually clear before you add more in. Because if you do it all at once, it's actually not going to be the same physical process that you would expect. And that's what I mean when you can actually go and buy a high fructose corn syrup from a beekeeping supply, and then you're off to the races. But if you're making it at home, I strongly suggest, doing it in, pouring your sugar in phases.
How much should we how much should we give at a time? How much should we feed at a time? And starting when?
So starting when, again, so you'd want to actually keep, as I believe her name was Marion, who gave the kind of debrief there. You'll want to actually start considering feeding by mid-September. Of course, it actually matters too if you're treating for mites. So what I do is I don't feed while I treat for mites because I believe it honestly does likely more damage than good. So I do try to do one round of mite treatments right now because we actually want to try to start protecting the winter workers that are being formed. And that's actually a really important thing to keep in mind, is that the queen essentially stops laying about mid-October. That's just kind of a general rule, a general outline, but she takes a lot of her cues from nectar flow, temperature, temperatures at night, and then of course decreasing sunsets or decreasing levels of light. So you have about a month to really boost up the actual health of your winter workers. And so, yeah, you can consider feeding and treating at the same time, but if you can actually separate them, I would recommend doing that. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to be slapping on my 3 weeks worth of Thymovar treatment. And I've been using Thymovar for the past 5 years, and I'm not making this up. I lost my first colony last year, and it was mostly due to neglect. Thymovar is yet another consideration. It's not recommended to actually feed while Thymovar is on, but then you actually get a break. So it's the 3 weeks with Thymovar on, then you can feed for the week, and then you actually can pop another round, which is highly recommended, of Thymovar on for another 3 weeks. And that actually really then does basically rear some non-mite infested winter workers.
How much feed are you putting in when you say feed? Are you talking about using like an 8 kilogram pail? Are you talking about feeding just the 2 kilograms of sugar? Like how much feed at a time?
Okay, so my method, again, because you ask 3 beekeepers how to do something, you get 9 different answers. So my method actually is I get these things, they're just called rims. So they're about like 1.5 inches thick, and it's a rim. And I actually fill Ziploc bags almost to the brim. So large Ziploc freezer bags, I fill that with the sugar syrup that I make almost to the brim. You actually have to keep an air pocket. So you actually have to keep a little bit of space in the bag so that when you lay the bag down on the top bars of your brood chamber, there's actually a little air bubble that forms. And then you can take an X-Acto knife and you cut 2 slits into the bag. And then you can actually you can feed right on the colony without any buckets, without any risk of robbing. The feed is literally just plopped right on the hive, and then the bees suck it back at their leisure, basically.
So those bags you're talking about are 4 liters. So are you putting 1 bag on at a time?
I would do 1 bag at a time because you're actually going to run out of room if you try to put 2 on. And then I try to do that at least twice. So the Ziploc bag is a really handy method. It's not messy at all. You don't get problems with raccoons and stuff, like trying to dump over your buckets. It's actually a really good contained system as well for literally like lowering the likelihood of getting robbing and wasps as well. And then of course the bees will, honestly, they'll tell you when they're topped up because they won't actually take any sugar back. So they will stop actually sucking from the little Ziploc bag. And you'll find sometimes, in early October, that they're actually all topped up and they don't really need anymore. And it's good.
So you have your hive, you put the bags on top, then you slash the top of the bag with an X-Acto knife, like 4-inch slits, and then you put your cover on top, your inner cover on top.
Yes.
Wedges it all in place, and there's no spillage because of that air pocket that allows you to do the slits.
Yes, it's imperative though that you actually use this rim that I'm talking about.
Okay, so it doesn't squash it.
Yeah, and they're actually really easy to make. You could even consider using like a medium or shallow super actually as well to just get your inner cover basically up off the bag so that the bees can actually have the space to come and feed from the slits. So again, yeah, leave a little bit of a space at the top of the Ziploc bag before you zip it up, and then you can lie it on its side, and then you'll see where the air bubble forms. Don't go too crazy, like a little slit.
Okay.
Don't slash it. Just, make sure that there's 2 cuts because you don't want it to spill all the way out either, right? And it's going to be all over the place. So Again, try to do it in phases because, again, as Marion was saying, it's really important to actually allow for the queen to have still space to rear that winter brood. You don't want her to become honeybound in so much that you start packing the bees with too much feed and the queen literally does not have enough space. So you can consider a short blast of feed, even a half Ziploc bag if you wanted, just to make sure that they actually have enough food to rear brood. Because that's another thing, what bee bread is it's a mixture of pollen and nectar, essentially. So you'd actually want to make sure that you just give them a little bit of food so that they can rear that brood. You can slap in a pollen patty if you're concerned or curious. And of course, this is actually all highly dependent on the fact of whether or not you still actually have things in bloom, right? Because what bees essentially need is just things from their environment. They don't really need us to intervene except too much. But of course, if you're living in a place where there's definitely a dearth, there's not very much goldenrod or aster out right now, then you actually do need to give your bees a little bit of a heads up or assistance or 6 legs up, if you will.
So can you see the chat, Janine? Dana has asked a question.
Oh, yeah,
saying that yeah, so
So the apivar, that's assuming that your honey is off, right?
yes.
Okay, that's good. Apivar, a little bit of food. Since they're in for so long, how would you suggest I feed? With the apivar strips, it's okay if you feed. Same with Formic Pro, but it's not necessarily good. It's more just like a cross contamination thing. So if you want, did you put 2 apivar strips in kind of like along the radius of the brood nest? How did you? This is for Gary. No, this is for Dana. Yeah.
I just thought this might be easier. Yeah, I put 2 strips in, like a few frames apart on the brood nest.
Okay, so you should be okay. You can. Are your bees pretty light as well?
They're not super light. I feel like I need to feed them a little bit, but they still have quite a bit of honey.
Okay, nice. I would actually just suggest just waiting for now, because right now it's actually really important that you get basically the protection against the mites. I would say that that's actually really, really top notch importance right now, and then consider feeding maybe later in September. Because there's time for that. And again, you don't really want to put too much, you don't want to overwhelm the colony with too much going on, because we like to keep things simple and we want to make sure that bees can actually do what they need to do. And that's rear healthy winter brood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And then so for Gary's question, 8 liters per hive. Usually I can get about, for those Ziploc freezer bags, I can actually feed about, I double it. So I actually use 4 kilograms. So I take 2 packages of sugar, which then would be closer to about 11 to 12 cups of water. And okay, I'll just back up. Sorry. That 2 kilograms for 5.5 cup ratio for the 2-to-1 syrup, you'd likely get about 2.5 worth bags of Ziploc freezer bags. So if you have 1 colony, then you can feed twice. If you have 2 colonies, then you have enough feed for both. I tend to have to make several rounds of feed because of just the amount of colonies that I have.
And
Paint stirrer or a drill to make sure that the sugar is properly dissolved. Because again, if you're actually doing it in phases, I strongly recommend, and it's actually a really good sign of successful basically dissolution, or the sugar has actually dissolved in your water, is you stir really well, you keep stirring, and you continue to stir as you're dumping the sugar, because again, you just want to make sure that the sugar is completely dissolved. You want it to become clear every time. If your sugar is cloudy, that's going to give your bees diarrhea, and it's kind of the counter effect of what you're going for. You want to feed them, not make them eject what they eat. So it's imperative to try to actually get that sugar syrup as clear as possible. And I definitely do highly recommend or suggest stirring basically the whole while. And you'll notice too, as more sugar that you add into the hot water, it's not actually ever going to boil, and you definitely don't want it to come to a boil either, because that's then going to start denaturing the actual sugar molecules, breaking them apart.
A lot of places sell supplements, like Hive Alive. Do you ever use anything like that? Is there any reason why you would use it?
Well, if everyone, I love baseball, so if everyone's interested in a humongous curveball, I can answer that question with utmost honesty. The only time that I truly feed is in the spring, and I don't add any Honeybee Healthy. The essential oils, I believe, is maybe I'm just a bit of a purist or a traditionalist. I think the essential oils, it's just really unnatural. I don't see bees bringing in essential oils into their colony, which means that I'm not even sure if it's actually all that effective. It may make us feel like we're being proactive and helpful. And I've actually never used it, so I'll be honest. What I actually do, everyone, and I'm sorry, this is the curveball, I actually leave a medium super on my bees for the winter. I give my bees a medium super's worth of feed of their own honey for the winter, and I have not lost a single colony until last year or the spring.
And is that on a single brood chamber or a double brood chamber, Janine?
For the well, it's actually, I've done it for doubles and singles, because the way I kind of run my doubles is that I actually force them to start storing honey into the like the upper brood chamber, where the brood, basically the queen is keeping the brood in the bottom. They start packing honey into the upper brood chamber, and then I actually do put a medium super of honey's worth back onto the double brood chamber, and then singles definitely get their own medium super as well. And what I actually do is I take all the honey off, so I extract all the honey, but I keep track of what is my winter supers. And then I actually, because then I take them all off, I want to put my treatment on. When I'm extracting honey, I just keep the winter supers in the corner of my little honey room. And then when the treatment's done, I put the honey supers back on, and then I wrap and I walk away. And there's zero mortality. And again, Grey County, I mean, we're at least 2 weeks, like our spring breaks at least 2 weeks after, say, someone like Guelph. And yeah, it seems to work, because this is exactly the reason why bees make honey, is so that they actually have food to live on when there are hard times, basically, when there's really low food, when there's a dearth. So that's actually, for the record, not something I learned at the Honeybee Research Center at University of Guelph. This is something that I've been doing for 6 years, and I find it to be pretty successful.
I do the same thing, Janine. I leave a medium honey super on, and I lost quite a few of my hives last year, and I think it was just the temperature fluctuation. Because I know in December we were digging a water line through our field, and so the ground was not frozen at all in December. So I think like we just had so much temperature fluctuation that when I opened them up in the spring, all the honey was gone. Like there was nothing in them. So they did eat everything, and that was leaving them with a medium on.
I'm sorry to hear that. And I mean, how close by was how close to the colonies was the digging? Didn't register that answer, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it was they were really close. Like I dug in my alpaca field, and my honeybees are right behind the alpaca field, and yeah.
So this, yeah.
Like now, like we were freezing the other night, and then it was like 34, 36 degrees on Saturday, and then it was the next night it was freezing, right? So we're just having huge temperature fluctuations.
So I'm actually reminded of this one study that basically was performed near the University of Guelph's Research Center. And it was actually comparing honeybees set down next to a snowmobile trail. And honestly, the vibrations of the snowmobiles, like whipping back and forth, at a continuous rate, basically all winter, actually did starve the bees out, because the bees were continuously disturbed and woken up and bothered. That actually made them more active, and that actually made them consume more of the resources. So I reckon that actually might be probably the number one reason why you lost a lot of your colonies, because they were basically not being left to slumber in the way that they needed to. They were being disturbed way too much. So temperature fluctuations perhaps, but I would actually doubly down suspect that it would have been the disturbances. So again, it's really important to choose your honey yard location, or your bee yards, the location accordingly, where you should try to keep them away. I mean, that's actually probably going to be pretty hard in the city. Sorry, country girl talking here. But yeah, the like not next to a fan or something, right? Like that might be running all winter as well. Any other questions? I have a kitten here if you want to look at him.
Do you ever need to assess the pollen stores in the fall and add any pollen patties? I've watched Ian Stemler, who is in Saskatchewan or Alberta, and he was adding pollen patties this week to his single brood chambers. I mean, he's a very specific circumstance, and he does talk about, you know, his climatic area being very important to the strategy. But is there anything to note about that?
Yeah, so if you are actually going through your brood chambers just to kind of check to see how everyone is doing this time of year, I strongly recommend doing that. And we all know too that bees really kind of organize their brood chambers in so much that like positions like 1 and 2 and 9 and 10 of the frames are basically like food stores, right? So you should actually expect for those frames to at least be coming in like pretty packed with pollen and honey at this time. And so again, it all just kind of depends on your location. But again, it's actually been known and shown that goldenrod pollen is actually some of the highest in protein content. And it's almost like Mother Nature actually knows to look after her own in such a way where this goldenrod protein is provided for the winter workers, basically, to be extra robust, because these winter workers need to survive 4 months as opposed to 4 weeks, right? And the winter worker, like physiological composition, like their actual, the amino acids and their actual physicality of a winter worker is completely different to that than a summer bee. And so, yeah, like the bees, this is quite honestly, like pollen is the bee's protein. Nectar is the bee's carbohydrate, and we all know where we would be if we didn't have both of those things, right? They're the building blocks of cellular formation and function. And so, yeah, goldenrod honey is actually the highest, one of the highest in protein, which is really quite good for the winter worker development. So from what I actually understand, when you get a pollen patty, it doesn't really tell you what pollen it is. But if you really wanted to top up your bees' health and nutrition for winter, I would strongly suggest just doing it. The bees might end up, you know, obviously eating it, but if you're short on pollen, I would honestly say that there's actually absolutely no harm, and it would actually help the colony build really robust winter workers.
If your bottom brood box is quite weak, like if your hive is quite weak, and you notice that in your bottom brood box, the 2 outer frames are still kind of empty, like my hive, the top brood box is getting to be full with honey, but they left the bottom ones kind of empty. Can I switch them out for ones that are full of honey, or is that just me trying to bandage a bad situation and my hive's going to die anyways? Sorry, that sounded really depressing. I'm willing to do what it needs to do to save my hive. I'm just.
Yes, we can get the defibrillator out, right? To try to recover.
Early on, so I just don't want to make a false move that's actually disturbing what they're doing or the signs that they're telling me.
Yes, and so the way, like, okay, so to answer your question, but I have one first. You're running a double brood chamber, but the queen is with us.
She's all right, you know. I think summer's been rough. She needed a unionized vacation. She didn't get it.
Yeah.
And then I had another hive die Well, pretty much the queen just left. I tried to requeen, it didn't work, but they have piled in the honey. And so I was thinking of taking some of those hives, as long as I test for the mites, and using those honey frames and putting them in. I don't want to make a bad situation worse by like mixing up hives and making like a quilt out of the mess that I already have. But I'm also just trying to salvage. I tried a treatment that was too strong on it. Was like a more natural organic treatment for varroa mites, and I was told that maybe that's what kind of killed the queen off, that it was just too strong on my hive, and potentially my hive was too weak to begin with, and therefore that's what ended up killing her. So I was just trying to plan for the fall how I'm going to kind of amalgamate this mess, or whether that would make the situation worse. And I should let my bees build it up themselves by just feed.
Yeah, so if you're running a double brood chamber, I mean, right now the really important piece is to make sure that the queen can actually rear this brood. So my first question is, are there enough worker bees to actually support brood production right now?
Last time I checked, yes.
Okay. I would then, I would strongly suggest actually almost the reversal of what you proposed. I would try to amalgamate everyone down into one brood chamber. I ditched running doubles, because again, if you're expecting the bees to keep twice the amount of space warm during the winter, essentially, that's going to really put a tax on them. So I would actually recommend amalgamating the two brood chambers into one, where I would do positions, is it 9 or 10 frames?
10.
10? I would do positions like 1 to 3 and then 7, 8, 9. Food. Try to amalgamate all the brood into the center and see if they can rebound from that. Hope
Thanks.
that, yeah. But yeah, if you try to compile them, then it will be less space for like mice to take over and all that stuff. And again, it's like, it's an empty basement, and that gets chilly in the winter, right? You want to keep the heat trapped.
Thank you very much for all of that information. That was great. We might have you back again and talking more about it, because I'm sure that's something that we need to. Okay, sorry, new topics, not the same topic. We'll have you back with other bits of information. I have a question. I don't know if is everybody here okay just to jump straight into the next one?
Or would you like 5 minutes?
So we won't take a break, and maybe is that all right? Yeah. Can we jump right to you, Jeannie? And I'm gonna just introduce you.
All right, so I think that's it for us. Thanks, everyone. Little Beverly.
Thank you very much for coming.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Okay, our next speaker is from BEEpothecary. It's Jeannie Som. She has a Bachelor of Education and she has a Master's of Education. She's a retired educator of 36 years, a 12-year beekeeper, and co-owner of BEEpothecary, a small business that produces dietary supplements, skincare, and shaving products made with propolis and other beehive resources. Jeannie enjoys reading, studying research, writing, and speaking about the benefits of bee resources and their value-added products. Recent back surgeries have limited her mobility, and so she's learning to keep bees in AZ-style hives, which can be inspected while seated. She continues on as an educator in retirement, sharing her passion for beehive resources and teaching others about their amazing health benefits, the many value-added products that can be made to promote health powered by bees. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen and we can get started. I have been asked to talk about a big topic, or a big, a lot of information. So fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to go fast and there's a lot of information here. We're going to talk tonight about how to collect, harvest, and clean, and also store and use all of the hive resources. So we're going to go through everything from honey to royal jelly, if you care. So my screen's moving by itself. So we're going to start off real quick, and I'm sure that most of you probably have harvested honey. But the interesting thing about honey health-wise and medicinally is that it is the exact perfect mixture of glucose and fructose for our body and for our liver storage, which is where the rest of our body gets its energy. And it is nutrient rich for our bodies, not just the bees. It has health benefits for sleep. They say sometimes if you're having trouble sleeping, it's because your body is hungry, your liver is hungry, and it wakes you up so that you'll go eat something. It also has benefits for exercise recovery. I don't know why this is moving. I'm not touching anything. And it is, it doesn't have the effect of spiking your blood sugar like regular sugar does. It's metabolized more like fruit. It can help with stress because it's an antioxidant and it's good for your heart. Medicinally, honey is antibacterial. It actually kills staph, strep, MRSA, and things like that. They are using it in every hospital and nursing home in the country these days, on wounds, on bed sores, on burns, all kinds of things. And the interesting thing about honey is that in the wound, honey makes tiny amounts of hydrogen peroxide. So it naturally debrides the wound without the nurse having to come in and dump a whole bottle of hydrogen peroxide in your wound. That feels really good. And then it also kills the bacteria by pulling the moisture out of the bacteria so they die. So it is very effective. And I wondered how they ever got honey into the hospitals through FDA. And I finally looked it up one day, and it says that the company, I'm assuming the company that manufactures and produces the Manuka honey from New Zealand, asked for a waiver. Again, this is moving on me. Asked for a waiver from FDA. They're classifying the honey as a medical device, like a heart stent or a Band-Aid. They're saying that honey creates an environment for healing, but it does. They're not claiming that it kills germs, even though it really does. So that's how they got it into the hospitals. At home, you can use it on wounds. You can use it for skin care and hair care. It's good for your skin and your hair because it is hygroscopic, so it brings that moisture into your skin and your hair. You can actually put honey in your shampoo, and it won't, if you don't put too much in, it won't be sticky, but it does help heal wounds. It is also good for coughing. It says there's research showing that honey's better for cough than the dextromethorphan that's in cough syrup. It can help you sleep, and it's also wonderful in cooking and baking. Now, once you cook it, of course, you don't have, you've killed those beneficial enzymes and such, but it does make baked goods very soft and fluffy and kind of a yellow color and a good taste. To harvest the honey, one of the things that for new beekeepers that I want new beekeepers to understand is that you don't have to harvest a whole box. You don't walk out to your hive one day and say, oh, this is a whole box of honey, and pull it off, because it might not really all be ready. So typically when we go out, we look at every frame and we harvest one at a time. We use a brush to just brush the bees off, smoke the bees down at the top, and then brush the bees off as we walk over to an empty box on a cart somewhere away from the hive. And sometimes you'll find that maybe half the frame is capped and half isn't. And they've said if you turn the frame facing down and shake it, if it doesn't drip out, it's probably ready. They just haven't gotten around to capping it. You can also use a refractometer and check the moisture content of your bees. You can buy them on Amazon for $20 or $30. And then, as I said, we walk it over to a cart and put it in an empty box and put a sheet or a towel over it to keep the bees out of it. Well, this doesn't want to move. Moves when I don't want it to. Now, if you are going to harvest your honey and you're not going to extract it right away, you need to put it in a sealed container of some kind, or if it's just in one of your boxes, put a lid on it, because it does gather moisture from the air. And if you leave it sit too long in your house and it's really humid, the honey will get too much moisture in it and then it will mold. Put it in a sealed container if you can. We have a hive butler that's made specifically to hold frames in it, and that's a pretty nifty container. If you do put it in plastic tubs, please be aware that under the molded handles on the plastic tub are drain holes. And so if you put it in a plastic tub, you got to duct tape those drain holes closed, or you will get, you know, air in that. You might even get ants and other critters in that box of honey. Now you can use an extractor if you can get your hands on one, or if you have one. A lot of times clubs will have them, and you cut the cappings off and spin it out in an extractor, or you can crush it, which just is chopping up the beeswax and putting it in like a pantyhose or a paint strainer and letting it drain over a bucket for several days and squeeze it out. I've seen some people use those old potato ricers, if you remember those from, if you're older like I am. We had one in my house, and my mom used to make riced potatoes, but you put the wax in it and then squeeze the handles together and the honey would come out the bottom. I'm going to also encourage you to save your cappings wax and render that differently. I'm going to tell you how in a little bit, because you can get cool stuff out of your cappings wax. Oh, here it is right here. So when you are extracting your honey, you only want to strain it. Sometimes you want to strain it through a larger hold strainer and then strain it through a more fine one, but save your cappings wax from your straining. And I'm going to show you how to do something with that shortly. Now, I've looked at some of the laws for Canada. I know in the US and in Ohio in particular, we are allowed to bottle at home. We can use glass or plastic. And of course, it's easier to bottle your honey if it's warm. If you have a way to warm it up, or have one of those wraparound, kind of like a heating pad that goes around your 5-gallon bucket, it makes it a lot easier to bottle it. But I did look at some of your laws, and you do have to have the common name. You have to have the quantity, and I'm going to assume it's in grams. Is that correct? Does anybody know?
Yes, it's all by weight.
Yes, by weight. Name and address of your business, the grade name, and that's based on some documents I believe that your government has on the moisture and clarity, the color, and you have to put product of Canada and a lot code, which means you have to keep track of, you know, when you made it. So it'd probably be a good idea to use maybe the date for your lot code, month, day, and year, something like that.
That information is required for honey being sold outside of the province. The last
yes, and that's exactly what one of the things it said. But some of it also said between the provinces you had to have some of these things. There is some kind of a compendium that defines the honey grades and the content and color, but there was an established inspection manual that has been archived, and I'm assuming that means it's no longer being referenced. It does say that an inspector can come into your premises at any time to look at your operation and consult OMAFRA if you have questions. I know in Ohio and in the US, they're just looking for basic good manufacturing practices. You know, is your space clean? Are your pets out of your kitchen? Are you wearing, you know, we always wear gloves if we're selling honey, just things like that, that you're trying to do your best to keep contaminants out of your honey. And of course, value-added products means that with an agricultural substance, you've changed it somehow to give it more value and sell it for more money. That's what a value-added product is. So with honey, you could sell honeycomb and charge more for that than you would for a pound of honey. Or sometimes people just sell honey with a chunk of comb in it. You can make creamed honey by inoculating it with already made creamed honey, and it turns the whole batch, kind of like sourdough, into creamed honey, and you can sell that for a premium price. You can also flavor and infuse honey with dried herbs, spices, even dried vegetables like peppers. It's really important, though, if you do that, that you use dried materials, because if you add fresh herbs to honey, you're adding water to the honey. And then you would always have to keep that honey in the refrigerator or it will mildew or mold. So dried materials are the best. One of the things we sometimes do is use the little voile gift bags with a drawstring, and we'll use that and put the herbs or spices in that and put that in the honey. And then when you want to strain it out, all you have to do is pull out the little bag, or you might want to leave it in. You know, a cinnamon stick or a sprig of rosemary or something like that to make it pretty. You can also put honey in lip balms, skin creams, wound salve type things. The one thing I will tell you though is that honey is water-based and oils and creams and butters are oil-based. So it's really difficult to get the honey to stay mixed. We have found that if you use an immersion blender, just one of those little stick blenders, and blend it up, right before you pour it, like in your lip balm molds or whatever, it will stay immersed, I guess is the word. And so you don't end up with just honey left in the bottom of your pouring pot when you're pouring the lip balms. But that works pretty well. Now, this is our passion. Propolis is something that, of course, we had never heard of until we had bees. And I started seeing it in some of the reading that I was doing, and I just was intrigued and started reading more and more about it. And what I have found, we all have found it with our business, is that propolis is used all over the world as a medicinal product, except in this country and in the UK. Most of the other countries in the world, South America, Mexico, Europe, China, Japan, use propolis as a medicinal product. Oops, wrong direction. Propolis has been proven by research to be antibiotic. It kills staph, strep, MRSA, E. coli, salmonella. It's amazing on wound healing. It is antiviral, so it kills, stomach viruses, wart virus, shingles virus, shortens the common cold by 2.5 times. It's antifungal. It will treat athlete's foot yeast infections and things like that. It's antioxidant in your body if you take it orally. So it's like the CoQ10, it gathers free radicals in your body, which is part of the disease process. It's also anti-inflammatory. So inside and out, it reduces swelling and redness and reduces inflammation. And it's also analgesic, meaning it is pain relieving. And it's amazing for those kids screaming ear infections. If you put a few drops of propolis right in their ears, it will give almost instant pain relief. The way that we collect it a lot is, every time you inspect, you have propolis in your way. It's stuck to the frames, it's down in between, it's stuck to the lid, you can't get things apart. Now, we don't want to take the propolis away from the bees that they're using. I mean, the propolis is there for a reason. It disinfects their hive and kills the germs in the hive. But we always have propolis that's in our way. So we always take a can of some kind out with us, and we just scrape the propolis that's in our way off into the can so that we have it. Also, we put thumbtacks, just regular flat thumbtacks, on the rims of our boxes. Then when you put this next box on top, it sets the box up just a little teeny, maybe 1/16 of an inch, and the bees will fill that crack with propolis. Then the next time you inspect, you can just take your hive tool and zip off that little, almost like a caulking bead around the box of the hive and save that. And I figured it out one time. It takes about a walnut size amount of propolis to make almost 2 quarts of propolis infused oil or tincture to use for your family's health. So it doesn't take very much. Now, you don't want it in that big blob shape, and I'll show you how you want to save it. What we do then is, after we collect it, we bring it in the house, put it in a baggie and freeze it, because if you leave it sit out, just even at room temperature, it'll sort of melt together into a big blob, and you don't want that. Now, propolis trapping is something else you can do, but of course, nobody ever tells you exactly how to do it. The propolis trap in the back on the left is the one you can buy from the beekeeping supply stores. And the idea behind it is, and of course they don't tell you this, you put it on the top without your inner cover, but they never tell you that you have to block the lid up, because if there's not light coming through it, they won't put any propolis in it. They don't even know it's there. The idea being that once they fill all those little cracks with propolis, you pull it out, put it in a big garbage bag, put it in the freezer, and then pull it out when it's frozen and kind of manhandle that plastic frame and twist it and shake it, and all that propolis is going to fall off. Well, let me tell you, it doesn't really work that well. That propolis trap is very stiff, and you can see how, they've jammed propolis in some of those slits. And so you can imagine sitting out there with a steak knife or your hive tool and having to go through every single little slit there to get the propolis out. It's a pain in the neck. So we do other things. We found a company that makes this plastic mesh and that we put on the top instead. Now you can use anything that has holes smaller than 3/8 of an inch. You cannot use something bigger than that, or they will put beeswax in it, and that's not what we want. In Europe, I've seen pictures where they just use window screen. I've been looking online today. The company we used to buy this plastic from is no longer selling the size we need. But I've been looking at needlepoint canvas they do make hardware cloth that's kind of flexible. That's 1/4 of an inch. But again, once you manhandle metal hardware cloth, you can't ever get it flat again. So I think the plastic is probably the better idea. I've been looking at chicken fencing and things like that and trying to find something that's got, 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch to use as a propolis trap. Winter cleanup is another time to get propolis. All the propolis that's stuck on the edges of the frames, on the boxes, in the lid, that's all propolis you can save and use. So what we do is sit out on the porch in the fall, and once we've pulled our honey supers off and we're cleaning up equipment, and we work over an inverted inner or outer cover and a big tarp, and we just scrape. And the rule of thumb is if it's shaped like a hexagon, it's too much beeswax. Don't scrape that into your pile of propolis. And you can kind of tell. You can even put, just chew on a piece. You can tell the difference in the texture. And again, here's, some of the gooey propolis. And of course, by this time it's pretty hard. And you really want it in these small pieces. So again, we put it in a baggie and put it in the freezer until we're ready to work with it. Now, it does have to be cleaned. You would not believe how dirty this propolis is because it's real sticky. So it's going to pick up dirt and things off the bees. So what we do is we start out by smashing it with a hammer on the sidewalk with something underneath. You really don't want that propolis to break out of that bag and end up on your sidewalk because it will not come off. You will have orange sidewalk. So be very careful doing that with a tarp or something underneath. We have chicken feed bags that a lot of times we'll use and to protect it, and they won't break through. So you smash it up. Also, it's about the size of oats. And then you fill a bucket and put the propolis in the bucket. Fill the bucket almost to the top, and then put your hand in there and swish it around. Get it going real fast, and then pull your hand out and let it settle. Now, when it settles, what happens is the beeswax and the wood chips and the bee parts and the grass and the paint chips all float to the top, and the propolis sinks to the bottom. Now, this particular batch was really, really dirty, and it had a bunch of awful stuff in it. It just depends on, we're very careful when we collect it, but some people that we get propolis from are not. You typically do not have this much stuff floating in the top. But if you do, you can see in my hand, there are some big pieces. And what happens is if there's propolis stuck to beeswax and there's too much beeswax stuck there, it will make the whole thing float. So we try to break up those big pieces and separate the propolis from the beeswax. But basically you have to pull all of that off either with your hands or with a strainer. I just used an old piece of screen. And then you repeat the process. So you can keep that same water. You can swish it again, pull some more, let it settle, pull some more off. Typically I pour the dirty water out. You can see in the right bucket how dirty that water is. And you're going to do this until the water is clear, until you can actually look down in the water and see the bottom. So you pour it off and you keep repeating, and you can see less and less debris coming to the top. Use a screen, to pull that out. Now, if you use a strainer from your kitchen, you will never be able to use it for food again. So just remember that propolis is worse than beeswax as far as sticking on things. So continue doing that until you have clear water, and then pour it off. Now, this is actually a piece of old window screen over a piece of, or a plastic trash bag, but pour it off on a screen and spread it out to let it dry. Now, one word of caution, the first time I ever did this, I had an old screen door from the back patio sliding door. I thought, I'll just use that because we're going to buy another screen door for the patio. And so I left it on the back deck, forgetting that in the morning when the sun comes up, it shines right on the deck. And by the time I remembered it, it was about 11:30 and I had beeswax or propolis melting through that screen from the sunshine, from the sunlight. And of course, we ended up not being able to buy another screen. So I had to put that back up on the back door. But so anyway, you know, do pay attention, not leave it out in the sun. What I typically do is when it stops dripping, I will take that screen in and lay it over a towel on the dining room table. You can also dry it in a food dehydrator on low. You don't want it to be above 120. Now, once it's dry, we put it in baggies again and freeze it again because it's now in little pieces and we don't want it to get all lumpy and chunky because the finer it is, the smaller it is, the better it will infuse. Now we store it in the Ziploc bags until we're ready to work with it. And even before it's cleaned, especially, you've got to keep it frozen or it will mold because it has dirt and honey or nectar on there that's not, you know, dried down far enough, and it will mold. One of the things you can do is to check the potency of it, because every time we ask somebody, do you have any propolis? They'll say, oh, I got a bucket in the back of my garage, been there for 5 years. And so if you want to know if the propolis you might have already collected is still effective, you put it in a cup of milk, a teaspoon in a cup of milk, and let it sit for 4 days. And if the milk does not spoil and curdle, then the propolis is still effective. One of the things they're testing propolis for in research is using it as a food preservative because of the effects that it has. So it's pretty interesting. And that came from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. There's a fabulous resource I'll show you at the end with lots of cool information. Now, to use propolis, you can actually eat propolis, but I would warn you not to chew it because it does turn your teeth orange and it doesn't go away very fast. When you work with propolis without gloves, you will end up with orange fingers and orange fingernails. It can be put in capsules. If you want to grind it, it has to be really, really frozen and ground very quickly in a coffee grinder. A food processor won't do it. It has to be a coffee grinder that you will dedicate to propolis forever and ever. So that is what, and you can find propolis capsules in some health food stores. One of the things that we do with it mostly is to infuse it in a solvent. Now, the two solvents that we typically use are alcohol, as in drinking alcohol, and it can be the cheapest vodka you can find, or if you want to put it in your finest bourbon, you can do that. And we also infuse it in oil. So when it's done in alcohol, it's called a tincture. If it's done in oil, it's called an infused oil. You can also use glycerin, you can use water, you can use other things that aren't edible, but then you wouldn't be able to use it orally, you'd only use it topically. Typically the tincture, by just soaking it in the alcohol, you just leave it sit for 3 weeks and you shake it up every time you walk past it. And in 3 weeks time, they say when it makes your tongue numb, it's ready to go. Now we use the little voile bags you see there at the bottom, those little pink things, or we use a paint strainer when we make a big bucket of it. And then you don't have to strain it. You just pull the strainer or the little voile bag out. You make it by weight. So if you want to do a 5% solution, you would put, 5 parts of propolis and 15 parts of alcohol by weight in your jar, and then shake it up. Same thing with oil. The only thing different is that with oil, you have to heat it to 120 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes because the oil isn't as good a solvent for propolis, and so it takes a little help, just like when you have to heat the water to get sugar into it. You can use it orally, topically, in your ears, up your nose. It has to be diluted to put it in your nose. Trust me, you don't want it straight in your nose. And you can also use it in other products. If you've made propolis oil, you can use that as part of a skin care recipe or something like that. These are other things that you can find or make. Cough syrup, gum. They have propolis gum in Europe. Toothpaste. If you go to Trader Joe's, I don't know if you guys have Trader Joe's in Canada, but it's a big kind of a health food type store. And their house brand toothpaste is propolis toothpaste. Nose drops, cough drops, suckers. In Mexico, where our daughter lived for a while, they make suckers for kids to suck on when they're sick that have propolis in them. You can put it in creams and balms and lip balm. You can also use propolis alcohol tincture, well, really either way, I guess, or the oil to make varnish. Propolis is a tree resin, and wood varnish is made with resin and turpentine. And they say that the Stradivarius violins were varnished with propolis varnish. But you can make wood and leather treatments and creams for, you know, a leather couch or your motorcycle seat or your boots or whatever. And it's really can be used to sanitize. You can put it in, you know, a spritz bottle and clean up your counters and things like that with it, because it does kill lots and lots of germs. Okay, we're going to move on to pollen. Pollen is a nutritional powerhouse. It has just about every vitamin, mineral, and mineral in it. And also it's very high in protein. It's actually 40% protein. It's higher in protein than beef. However, you'd have to eat an awful lot of protein to equal a steak. So probably wouldn't want to do that. But it does have some research-based medicinal and health benefits. It helps regulate your intestines. It can increase your white blood cells and hemoglobin. It helps normalize cholesterol and triglycerides. And I will give you the link at the end of the presentation where you can go and read all of these research papers on all the hive products. It actually inhibits harmful bacteria, just like the honey and the pollen do. It's often used as an adjunct treatment to chemotherapy along with propolis. Propolis is said to protect healthy cells from radiation damage when you're undergoing radiation. It has delayed and or prevented cancerous tumors in mice. Now, everybody tells us, and we all swear by this, that pollen and honey help with allergies. Well, I have to tell you some bad news. There's no research that supports that claim. Everything that's said about honey and, excuse me, I'm doing something here. Honey and pollen for allergies is anecdotal. It's what people report. There's very, very little research that will, there's a few pieces of research that say that it has some effect in the allergic response, very small effect. And if you really think about what the theory is that if you take the pollen before the season that you're allergic, you're supposed to take it like 6 weeks ahead of time, or the honey, then that will protect you from then that allergic season. So let's say you're allergic to goldenrod. Well, goldenrod is out in the air in the fall. So if you are going to inoculate yourself with goldenrod pollen, either in the pollen or in the honey, taking spring honey is not going to help because there's no goldenrod pollen in that. Or buying pollen at the store or using pollen that you've collected from your own bees in the spring is not going to help you with that because there's no goldenrod pollen in it. You would actually have to have last year's fall honey or last year's collected pollen. And of course, you know, we know when we buy pollen at the store or whatever, it's not graded. It's not, you don't know where it came from. You don't know what season it was collected in. And so it's just kind of a crapshoot, but people swear by it and, you know, they keep taking it. So we'll have to go with that. To harvest pollen, if you've never done it, it's pretty labor intensive. And there's different theories about when and how often you should do it. But definitely you only want to take pollen or anything really from strong hives. And you want to do it during a pollen flow. So you have to know about the trees and the flowers and what are the sources out there. The recommendation mostly is to do it for 2 days to a week and then don't do it for the same amount of time. There are different kinds of pollen traps. Some fit underneath and it provides a different entrance. And the bees go through this new entrance and there's little cones of wire that they have to walk through, and the wires kind of pull the pollen off their bodies and it drops into a tray. And there's another kind that you can put on the face of your hive right at the entrance. And again, it's like a different entrance that they have to go through to get to the original one. And then there's if you see on the left, that little yellow tray at the top, then you pull off. Now, the issue is that you really have to remove the pollen daily. Pollen is very fragile and it molds very quickly. It really will only last about 2 days unless it's refrigerated. The other issue is that in order to clean it, you kind of almost have to hand pick it clean. It's going to have bee parts in it. It's going to have dirt in it. It's going to have, you know, grass and paint chips and all kinds of stuff. Other people have said you can use a hair dryer, but boy, I'd be afraid that the pollen would go flying. I'm not sure I'd be willing to try that. It will last for 3 to 6 months in the refrigerator, but it'll last a lot longer if you either freeze it or you dry it in a food dehydrator or your oven on low. And it will last 1 to 2 years. There's also a freeze drying process as well that works. And then once you've dried it, you have to keep it in an airtight container, a jar with a lid or something like that, in a cool, dry place. Now, the other issue about pollen is this: it is full of vitamins and nutrients, but one of the things most of us don't know, the reason the bees make bee bread in the hive with the pollen by mixing it with honey is that the pollen has a very hard seed coat and the bees can't digest it, and neither can we. So if people are just sprinkling pollen, you know, on their cereal or their yogurt or their salad, you're really not getting the benefit of it. It either has to be ground up with either a mortar and pestle or a food or a coffee grinder, or soaked at least overnight. So if you're going to make a smoothie the next morning, you get out the liquid that you're going to use the next day and soak the pollen in it before you make your smoothie the next morning, or grind it up. It can be put in capsules, in smoothies, and energy snacks. You know, you can make these little snack bars or little snack balls that have peanut butter, honey, and then all kinds of nuts and seeds, and pollen would be a good place to put those, as long as it's not being cooked. In skin scrubs, the benefit of it is the texture as a scrub on your skin, for putting in skincare things. Bee bread, again, looks like this from the side, and it's kind of an odd name. And we've always read that they call it bee bread because it looks like slices of bread when you look at the side. Now, you can actually extract bee bread. And so think about the size of the tool you'd have to have, and you go through every little cell and pull it out and put it in a jar. And to me, it looks really disgusting. It is food for the bees, and it's the way that pollen is broken down so they can digest the pollen. But you can also make bee bread outside the hive. It's a high energy nutritional supplement. So what you're getting with bee bread is you get the protein and all the nutrients, all the vitamins and minerals from the protein, and then the carbohydrates from the honey, which is metabolized more like fruit than sugar. We have found that it is equivalent in carbs and calories to runners and athletes' energy gels. But those energy gels typically are made from high fructose corn syrup and caffeine. And I've always wondered why athletes who train all year long and eat healthy, then the day of the race, they put that crap in their body. So we have friends that are now using bee bread instead of the high fructose corn syrup. We have friends that keep a bottle of it in their desk drawer. When they get the nods after lunch, about 2 o'clock, they'll just squirt a spoonful in their mouth. We talked to a lady one time that said she travels a lot for work, and she keeps a bottle in her car. When she starts falling asleep at the wheel, she'll take a serving of bee bread. And it's kind of interesting. It doesn't give you the jitters or that wide awake, you know, kind of zooey feeling in your head. It just, you suddenly realize that your eyes aren't drooping and you feel like you're awake again. So that's an interesting effect. You can make bee bread in any ratio. You can make it 1 to 1. That's pretty thick. 1 to 2, 1 to 4. I think 1 to 4 is what we typically do. You can just use the pollen as it is, or you can grind it up first. And you just put it in the jars and mix it up well, put it in a cool, dark place, or even in the refrigerator, and turn it over every time you think about it, because the pollen kind of floats to the top. And in between 2 to 6 weeks, that there's a fermentation process that happens. And at the end of that time, you'll have this nutritious bee bread. You can use it in your coffee and tea. You can make smoothies with it or energy bars. You can put it on toast. It's great over ice cream. Oh, and by the way, I like it better with cinnamon in it. I don't like it plain. Pollen has a very sort of a wheat germy taste, which I don't care for, but it's really good with cinnamon or clove or something like that in it. It's a great afternoon pick-me-up. You know, if I drink coffee at 3 p.m., I will be up all night. So this is a great thing to use before and after or during workouts. We use it. We make tea with it a lot in the summer when we are working outside and need to kind of keep going and doing, you know, heavy work. Talk a little bit about beeswax. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing okay. beeswax is very versatile. It's actually, well, it's actually classified as a food. It does have a small anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effect. It has a natural aroma, so no artificial scents. And so for people that are sensitive to artificial smells, beeswax doesn't usually bother them. If you make candles with it, it has very little smoke and no soot. You can use it as a surface protection for skin and leather, and it's used in industry on metal machinery and such also. You can harvest beeswax, just anything that's in your way, the old comb you've got, the burr comb you scrape out, the debris from cleaning up propolis. When I'm pulling that junk off the top of the propolis bucket when I'm cleaning it, that goes in a bucket and that gets melted down with beeswax because that's really what it is. The cappings, though, we're going to render separately, and I'll show you how. But all this stuff can be rendered down. Now, typically with rendering beeswax, you put some water in the bottom of a big pot. And again, you want these to be yard sale pots, not your fine cookware. I usually put about 3 inches of water in the bottom, and we do it in the garage on a hot plate so that we don't have it in the house, because I'm telling you, if you render beeswax in your house, you'll be scraping up spots off your floor for months. So we usually use a hot plate in the garage, put the water in, then add the beeswax, and then just watch it. Don't walk away from it, melt it down. We do not use a double boiler. And the reason is it takes forever to melt it that way. And I'm going to show you on the next slide. It's going to melt at 144 degrees Fahrenheit. I know you guys probably use Celsius, but don't overheat it. If it smokes, it's too hot. But well, I guess I don't have that. Beeswax doesn't flash and start a fire until 400. So you'd literally have to put the burner on high and walk away from it, for a few hours to make it flash. So if you're responsible and don't walk away from it, you'll be fine. Once you've melted this, you pour it through a strainer into a bucket. And when it cools, this is what you get. Now, this is the bottom of the disc of beeswax. So you can see down the side, it's looking a little cleaner if we flipped it over, but typically then we'll scrape off a lot of this dirty stuff on the bottom. Now, one time we were told that that there's a layer of propolis on the bottom. That's not true. It's dirt. If you don't believe me, you can taste it and you'll know it's not propolis. But, scrape the dirt off and then render it again. And you just keep melting it down and pouring it through finer and finer material. What I find is sheer curtains and cotton knit. Old t-shirts are really good for that last pour. We don't use paper towels or coffee filters because once the beeswax starts to fill up and clog up the holes, you can't take your hive tool or a spoon or whatever and scrape it off to get it to continue to filter, because it'll just tear the paper towel or whatever. So we always use cloth. Now this is the cool thing with cappings wax, and I learned this from some beekeepers that came to our meeting and did a presentation, and I just think this is the coolest thing. To melt your cappings wax, do it in a pot without water in it. Just put all that mess after you've squeezed every last, smidgen of honey out of it. Put that cappings wax in a pot and melt it, and stir it, melt it, melt it, melt it. Now, once it's all liquid, basically in your pot, you're going to have 3 layers. And in my mind, I thought, oh, well, I can see, you can't see them. It all just looks black. But the top layer is going to be the slum gum, that bee goo, with all the bee parts and the debris and the grass and the paint chips and all that. So I take a cup measure and I scoop very shallowly, scoop all that lumpy stuff off and pour it in a container, because I'll save that and melt that down. It's beeswax. It has beeswax in it. And then, pretty soon you've got no more lumpy stuff. And now that next layer on the top is wax. Now you've got 2 choices. You can either pour this into a bowl there and wait, or you can continue to skim off and pour this in a different container, this non-lumpy layer, and I keep sticking my finger in it as I scoop it up and to see that it's still wax. The third layer down at the bottom is honey. And it's called baker's honey because it's not raw anymore. You've heated it to 145 degrees. And the honey has caramelized a little bit, gotten a little darker. And it's called baker's honey because you can use it for baking. Why use your good raw honey and in baking when you can use something that's already been heated and not use up all your good raw honey? It's also said that it's better for mead making because you've destroyed some of the enzymes in the honey that sometimes interfere with the yeast action when you make mead. So that's another thing that you can get out of your hives. And I'm going to tell you something. When we do a full 10 frame medium of honey and then melt down all those cappings, we get about 8 pounds of baker's honey out of that. It just blows my mind that we get that much honey out of what we thought we had squeezed every last drop of honey out of. So pretty cool. And there's actually a market for it. You can buy baker's honey on Amazon by the pint and the quart. Now, one of the things that I have discovered in working with beeswax is the Fry Daddy is the best tool ever. A lot of people use a crock pot, but the problem with the crock pot is, number one, it only has low and high. And what I have found is on low, if you let it heat too long, it will eventually start smoking. That means the wax is above 180 degrees and it's going to start damaging the properties of the wax. And there's no way to control that. With a Fry Daddy, if you buy the big one that has the thermostat on it, you can set it to just melting point. It's, you know, little, a few letters into the word warm on the thermostat. And then it won't overheat. You can dedicate your Fry Daddy. The cool thing is it's Teflon inside, so it just wipes out clean when you're done. I leave my melted wax, clean melted wax, in my Fry Daddy, and it sits on my work table. And when I need wax or something, I just turn it on and melt it down. You know, and again, I have a rule. I have my workspace in my sort of my craft room, and I will do something else while I'm melting wax in the room. Just promise yourself that you will never walk away from it when it's on, and it's not going to flash. And then to clean up, the heat gun is my friend. I use a heat gun and paper towels, and I just go around and melt down the wax spots that are everywhere, and wipe them up with paper towel, and then we're done. Beeswax can be used a million ways. You can go online and find a list of hundreds and hundreds of things that you can use beeswax for, but I love it. I use it with sewing. If you wax your sewing thread, it's much easier to thread needles. You can treat your gardening tools with it. You can put it on zippers or nails and screws, or stop those squeaky, you know, windows or squeaky joints in furniture, and just all kinds of things. So it's a great thing to have out of the hive. And you use it in skincare products instead of petroleum. You know, if you look at the labels of the things we put on our skin, it's kind of amazing what we're doing to our bodies, and putting petroleum products on ourselves. And also you can make, you know, leather treatments, any kind of surface protection, you know, furniture polish, things like that with beeswax. Candles are wonderful. They burn a long time. They burn pretty hot. They don't soot. Now, there is an urban myth that's going around. I don't know if any of you have heard this, that, and as a matter of fact, I just heard the Honey Princess at our fair say this: burning beeswax candles cleans the air. And the story is that it makes negative ions when it burns, and they float into the air and grab the positive ions of the germs and the dirt, and they're heavy and they drop to the ground. Well, I looked and looked and looked and looked for research on that. And the only research I found on burning candles was that no matter what the candle was made of, whether it was soy or paraffin or beeswax, they all put off the same gases at non-toxic levels. But I finally found a site where an electrician got on. He said, I'm have a degree in electrical engineering. And he said, I'm going to tell you something. When you burn a beeswax candle, it does not make negative ions. You have to have electricity to do that. So that's not true. even though it goes around and around and around on the internet. Moving on, you're just going to get the whole overview today. Bee venom. Now, the one thing I will tell you about using bee venom for yourself is that you got to be miserable, because the treatment sometimes is worse than the affliction. But sometimes we're there. We got into it because my husband, in the first summer that we had bees, we were sitting outside one day and he said, you know, I got stung on my hand right between my thumb and my first finger, and my hand hasn't hurt since I got stung. He has arthritis in his hands. Said, I wonder if there's something to that. Well, of course, I had to go start looking it up and researching it. And in fact, there is decades of research on bee venom therapy, using either the bees or a metered dose of venom. And it is actually more effective for arthritis pain than acupuncture. They are testing it for MS, for Parkinson's disease, for Alzheimer's, and they're finding the amelioration of symptoms. So anyway, in this country, there will never be probably doctors who will give you metered doses of venom. You can do that in Europe, but not in the US. So if you want bee venom therapy, you're going to have to use the bees. They also, there are companies that buy bee venom, and I'm going to show you how it's collected. And there is a skin treatment called Venex. And for a while, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe, it was the rage in Hollywood. They were calling it Botox in a tube. And these movie stars and everybody were using it on their face. Well, I'm going to tell you something. When I put it on my skin, it is hot and itchy. I don't think I would want it on my face. It's pretty strong. It's kind of like having a bee sting. But they can trace the use of bee venom back to the ancient Greeks and the Chinese. There's decades of research. It's the melatonin peptide that's in the venom. It's anti-inflammatory, believe it or not, anti-inflammatory, even though you get an inflammatory reaction. And it's also anti-arthritic. What happens to simplify this very complex reaction? It activates the adrenal glands in your body. And after that initial inflammation, it creates a reduction of inflammation in your body. It changes your immune response. It activates your adrenals to send out enzymes and hormones that are healing in your body. It improves your stress response. They've shown that it inhibits tumor growth. So again, this is all based on research that's been done either on humans in a petri dish or on animals. And I'll show you how to get to that. They have tried it with immune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and MS, finding it effective with some of the symptoms and the pain issues. Immune disorders like allergy, asthma, and eczema, they're finding success with it. And Lyme disease. I went to the apitherapy conference that the American Apitherapy Society puts on periodically in different parts of the country. This was up in New England, and there were many people in the audience, probably almost a third of the people in the audience had Lyme disease and were using bee venom therapy for treatment. And I talked to this one young girl who had, what happens with Lyme disease is it has a biofilm, that lower right picture has a biofilm around the germ. So it prevents antibiotics from getting in there and killing the germ. And so it suppresses your immune system, and then you get all these other diseases on top of it. So this young girl, she was about 25, had lost her ability to walk and went blind in one eye, all from this Lyme that was in her body. And she started a bee venom therapy where they stung down in between the vertebrae down her back, where all the nerve endings start. And within 6 months, she had all her faculties back, and her Lyme disease load was almost nothing. So they really are having a lot of success for people that have suffered with Lyme disease for, many years. They're also trying it for neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease, and they're finding quite a bit of success with Parkinson's disease with helping with symptoms. Also ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, and Alzheimer's. So lots of research going on. And again, a lot of this research on the bee products is not done in the US because no pharmaceutical company is going to make money doing that. It's often done in Europe and China, Japan, Asia. It also is anti-inflammatory after the swelling goes down. It's effective for arthritis and pain. There's two schools of thought. One of them is sting where it hurts, and the other one is sting at acupuncture points. Now, Dr. Charles Mraz, who practiced up in New York and has passed away, I think, in the last 10 years, he's considered the father of American apitherapy. And his theory was you sting where it hurts. He actually was just kind of a country beekeeper that got involved working with some doctors, I think at Johns Hopkins, and did all kinds of interesting studies. But a lot of people that do bee venom therapy are acupuncturists, and they typically do the stinging at the acupuncture points as well. This is how bee venom is collected. They make these electrified glass platforms. And if you look over on the right, you set the platform in front of your entrance, and they have to walk across the platform to get in. And the platform shocks them, and they sting when they get shocked. And they deposit this little teeny drop of venom on the glass screen. And then when you're done collecting, you take that glass screen off and scrape it. Now, for 1 gram of dried venom, a gram weighs about as much as a small paper clip. For 1 gram of venom, you can get $80. Now it's going to take 1 million stings, 20 hives in 2 hours to get a gram of venom. But it's doable. But of course, to have 6 of these, it costs $1,000. So you got that's going to be a lot of scraping to get your money back, probably. But it is doable. Some people do it. If you are interested in ever doing bee sting therapy, couple of things I would caution you. Most people who are not acupuncturists that do bee venom therapy do not sting other people. They teach you how to either do it yourself or have a family member do it. And that lessens the liability issue, which I'll tell you a story because we had a situation. But basically what you need is these special tweezers that you buy on Amazon that when you pinch them at the middle there, they open. And when you let go, they close. So you get a jar of bees, as you can see in the background, and you take the lid off a little bit, you stick that big long set of tweezers down in there open, and you chase the bees around until you can catch one, either by the wings or the thorax, and take them out. You always want to have a first aid kit with you, Benadryl, an ice pack. If you can get epinephrine and an EpiPen, that's always a good thing. And I think now in the US, we can get a substitute EpiPen without a prescription at the pharmacy. Most doctors in the US will not write a prescription unless you really need one. So once you've grabbed that bee by the thorax, wherever you set her bottom down, only the females, they will sting. They recommend that you do a test sting first. Now, of course, for us, we've all been stung. We know what our reactions are. But if somebody came to you and said, would you teach me how to do this? You would want to do a test sting at the waist where there's lots of tissue, those love handles, and wait, just sting in and pull out, scrape it out, and then see what happens. Now, if you look at the right picture, that's a magnified picture of the venom sac and the stinger. You know how they always say, scrape the stinger off with a credit card, like we've all got a credit card out while we're, working our bees. But the idea is you don't want to grab a hold of that ball of venom sac and squeeze it to pull it out, because what you're doing is squeezing all that venom right down through that stinger. So always with your nail or with a hive tool, scrape it off to get it out. But always, with somebody new, do a test sting. You can sting at the pain site or the acupuncture site. Now, you can leave the venom sac in to pump for up to 15 minutes, but you really should work up to that, or at least know what your reaction is. When I was a kid, I used to have huge reactions to mosquito bites or allergy shots. And when I first started doing bee venom therapy, I would only leave it in for 1 or 2 minutes. And also you only, start with 1 bee, and then you can work up. Different things require different treatments, and you kind of have to get on and read about it. I mean, I use it on my shoulder frequently for bursitis. I was a school teacher, and I always carried my heavy book bag and my purse on my right shoulder, and I would get bursitis in my shoulder. So when it flared up, I would do 2 to 3 stings across the top of my shoulder, leave them in for a couple of minutes and then pull them out. And that's all. And sometimes I'd have to repeat it a couple weeks later, but usually that took care of it. But if you're going to treat something like back pain or something long-term, you're probably going to have to work up and do it. And they typically people do it every 2 to 3 days to get rid of something chronic. Icing before and after helps. You can also put propolis oil or tincture on it. Do not take Benadryl or put Benadryl cream on it, because that stops that reaction that triggers the anti-inflammatory reaction. So again, the number of stings, the length of time, the length of treatment. There's a way to do mini stings. They showed us at the conference where you take the stinger out of the bee and then you just poke it. Like both my business partner and I have moles on our face, and if you sting the mole, Lori stung a mole on her neck for over every other day for about a week and a half, and it completely disappeared. But you wouldn't want to have a big swelling on your face for a little mole. So the people that were doing the conference would do these little teeny mini stings where they just tap it and not actually stick the stinger all the way in. These are some great resources for learning about acupuncture and bee venom therapy and acupuncture points. This Health in the Honeybee is the Charles Mraz book. It's very easy to read. It's very conversational. It's kind of a story. And then the Acupuncture Quick Guides is something that I found that kind of helps you figure out if you want to try acupuncture points. It's not quite so overwhelming as thousands and thousands of acupuncture points. If you want to read research on any of these topics, go to nih.gov. National Institutes of Health is what that stands for, and it has research from all over the world, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of research on bee products. If you also use Google Scholar, sometimes if you use the Google search, it works better than the search on NIH to find what you're looking for. I have found that, like, if I'm looking for propolis and liver disease, it isn't going to find all of those as well as Googling it in Google Scholar outside of that site. So last thing, royal jelly. Royal jelly is a very fragile resource, and I'm going to just show you kind of what it does and what it doesn't do. It's made by the worker bees. It's water, protein, sugar, fats, amino acids. They feed all the larvae at their early stages, but of course only the queen gets it for her whole developmental time. The thing about royal jelly, though, is that it is not stored in the hive. So that's going to be an issue when you go to collect it. Now, interesting thing is, I know about 20 years ago, there was a company called Jafra, and it's still around, and they had this skin cream. They're saying, oh, this is the best thing for skin. It's got royal jelly in it. Well, there's no research showing that royal jelly has skin rejuvenating effects. And as a matter of fact, royal jelly degrades very quickly. But it does reduce total cholesterol and LDL-C levels, and it can improve the serum glucose in type 2 diabetes. But these benefits can be achieved by other bee resources. So in my opinion, disrupting the hive to gather royal jelly is kind of ridiculous. If you can take propolis that they don't need all of, or honey or whatever, and you do the same thing. But I'll show you how this is collected. Since it's not stored, the only place you can harvest royal jelly is from early larvae and queen cells. So imagine if you wanted to, collect royal jelly in your hives, how labor intensive that would be with a little teeny tiny tool. It also only lasts a week in the refrigerator. So you have to freeze it if you want to, hold it over. And I've tried it, and I'm telling you something, it tastes absolutely awful. And it has the texture of raw egg whites. So it's disgusting, in my opinion. This is how most of it is harvested. Most of it comes from China, which of course is where they use, illegal pesticides and such. So we don't know what's in it. And what they do is mimic the requeening process. They make all these queen cells and raise them up until they're full of royal jelly. And then they destroy them all and extract them. Now you can buy an extractor for $300 and go through with this little tube, or you can have this big giant contraption here, but the queen cells are removed by suction, and then they filter out all the larvae and the goo and have the royal jelly left. It has to be shipped frozen with ice packs. And of course, so by the time we get it, has it really been kept on ice? Has it really been kept frozen? Is it really viable? That's questionable. Again, if you try to do it in your own cell, you'd have to have a queen rearing hive, and you had to extract 10 to 20 cells for 1 ounce. And you'd have to have a strong colony and really know exactly what day would be the best to, extract the royal jelly out. So pretty labor intensive, probably not something most of us would want to do. You can ingest it orally. You can buy it liquid, frozen, or freeze dried. I've seen it at bee conferences in just these white jars, and it's just, like I said, it's like looking at raw egg whites. You can buy it, on the store shelves or on Amazon. And this is the Jaffa Royal Jelly skin cream that they advertise to do the wonderful things. Okay, I think we got through it all, but to wrap it up, these are some wonderful books that I found early on. This Honey Revolution book is really amazing. It's very detailed and almost like a textbook, but it's really interesting to learn about all the things that honey does in our bodies. And there's actually an abridged version if you don't want to read all the technical stuff. When I first started reading about propolis, these were the only 2 little books, the ones on the right and in the center, that I could find. And they were like little stapled booklets that I got on Amazon. But of course, now I've found the National Institute of Health, and you can read forever and never read it all now. This is another fabulous, 2 resources. This FAO.org is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And I hope we can read the top. I've got my toolbar across the top. If you go to FAO.org and you type in the search bar, value added products from beekeeping, it has to be exact or it won't find it. It will pull up this booklet, and it's about 200 pages long, and it will tell you every single thing you wanted to know about every single beehive resource. It tells you what it's made of, how the bees make it, what the bees do with it, how you harvest it, how you clean it, how you store it, what the market value is of it, and it gives you recipes for making everything from propolis tincture to bee bread. The whole 9 yards is there. It's a fabulous resource. And then, of course, if you want to read research, NIH.gov and Apitherapy Blogspot is another thing you can go to and sign up. And they send you in your email about twice a week 1 piece of new research to read about any one of the hive resources. It could be honey one day and propolis the next. And that's another great resource to go to read about all of these resources. Now I need to move on, and it won't move. Okay, I think that's it. Questions can be shot at me verbally, or you can put them in the chat box if you want to. I know that was a lot of information.
Tell us your story about your bee venom.
About what?
Bee venom. You said you had a story about bee venom.
Oh, our business partner, Lori, had agreed to do some bee venom treatments to a friend of a friend. And this gal was a massage therapist, and she was starting to have arthritis pain in her hands, which is not a good thing for a massage therapist. So she started coming over to Lori's house, and Lori had stung her all summer. And I happened to be over there one day, and this gal came over and got her stings, and within 5 minutes had an anaphylaxis reaction. And we had to call the squad, and she ended up in the emergency room and no health insurance, and it was not a good thing. So that's why, for bee venom therapy, I would suggest that you teach people, if you're interested in it, you want to learn about it, teach people how to do it, but let them do it themselves. I'll tell you, there was a gentleman in up around Lake Erie in Ohio, who I think was a plumber by trade. And for about 25 years, he was a beekeeper. This gentleman, Don Downs, had a bee venom stinging therapy every single Wednesday at his house from 7 to 8:30 or whatever. And people would come, 10, 15, 20 people show up every week. and they had jars of bees, and they would all load up. They had, scores of the tweezers, and they would all load up the tweezers and stick them upside down in a coffee mug with the bees attached. And then once they got all the tweezers loaded up, everybody would sting each other. And these are people that have MS, that have Parkinson's disease, that have Lyme disease, and they go faithfully. And some of these people might have 15 or 20 stings. Now, at the conference that we went to, they said 15 is enough. That's pushing it to go more than that. But it is possible to be overdosed with bee venom. There was a lady in Northern Ohio 2 summers ago who went out to her hives, and she was just gonna tip the box back and throw some treatments on. And she didn't bring her smoker. She didn't have her phone. There was nobody home, and she had her veil on, and that's all. And she ended up with a bee in her veil, and she got stung. Well, of course, then once she got stung, they all came out, and she ripped her veil off. Well, they all came out of the hive after her, and she's on the ground running around. And fortunately, the neighbors saw what was happening and called the squad. Well, of course, they come. They don't know what to do because there's bees everywhere. And they finally got their fire extinguishers out to suppress the bees. That lady ended up in intensive care in the hospital with a central line because she had thousands of stings, and it can kill you if you're not careful. So that's my story.
And on that happy note.
Yes, on that happy note. Just be careful.
Just out of curiosity, so how much, what's the percentage of honey you sell to the products that you use from the different things that you've shown us today?
Actually, we sell more propolis than anything. Propolis oil and tincture, the propolis cream. We make a propolis cream that is based on a big research study that I found on the National Institute of Health that was done in Poland in the 70s. And this doctor had 100 patients with hard to heal wounds, and he has before and after pictures. Some of these people had 30-year-old deep tissue ulcers, and he used 2.5% ointment, 2.5% propolis ointment. So what I've found through the research is 2 to 4% propolis is enough to kill all the gram-negative bacterias, the funguses, molds, and yeast, the viruses. However, when you start talking about systemic illness or pain, the doses are more like 900 to 1,500 milligrams instead of 2 to 4. It's very interesting. But yeah, we sell more propolis products than anything because people know it works.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? Is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, I don't see anything.
A quick question about the bee venom cream. My mom's in her 70s. She has really bad bursitis. She has arthritis from being a seamstress. I keep mentioning maybe about the bees, and she's like, hell no.
Well, I would try propolis first. We have people that walk up to our booth at an event and take the sample propolis oil, squirt a little puddle in their hand. They have arthritis, and they rub it into their hands, and within 5 minutes, they have pain relief. Now, it doesn't work for me that way or my husband. Our business partners, however, do get pain relief from topical propolis. So it's just, just like with anything else, it's different for everybody. But that might be the thing to start with, both orally and topically.
Like the bee venom cream that they're selling is a kind of a scam. And if you actually really wanted the good bee venom treatment, you would then.
Oh, no, I mean, it's not a scam. There's really bee venom in there, but what they say about it is that it's very benign. I disagree. When I put that on my skin, it's like I had a bee sting. It gets red and it swells, and then it starts to itch. I think it's awful. And I mean, maybe it's just that the Venex is really strong. For a while they were making all these skin creams, that the Hollywood actresses were all wild about. But I get a big a big sort of, topical allergic reaction to the Venex. It's not very comfortable. Let me tell you, it doesn't make the pain go away. It hurts. So, but again, that's part of the bee venom too, is that you've got to be miserable to want to take a bee sting on purpose. So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Janine, for coming to
absolutely.
talk to us about that today. We learned a lot, and
Wonderful.
we might have you back, and maybe we can do more specific things. And that was information overload. For sure.
Well, and I think, I think where we're coming from is that as beekeepers, we really don't have any idea the value of what we have. And if we know how valuable these things are, it helps us, sell to support our hobby or our business. And it also helps elevate the bees in people's eyes, I mean, they're just fascinating creatures, and look at all the incredible things that we can get from the beehives. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Okay,
Yep.
so that
All right.
ends all of our information session for tonight. Thank you very much to all of our speakers
Yep.
for coming to talk to us today.
Sure.
Our October meeting, we have our main speaker lined up. It's Andrew Cote. He has done some TED Talks. He's a beekeeper in New York City. And he was part of a group that helped get beekeeping legalized in New York City. So we're very interested to have him come and talk to us in October. And we've got Paul Kelly in November. So we've got some good main speakers lined up for the next couple of months. So hopefully,
Great.
we'll start to see people trickle in.
Is this your first face-to-face meeting in a while?
It is, and we're face to face with about 10 people.
Oh, that's wonderful. It just was so hard, wasn't it, to go on without being able to meet? So,
Really
I have another question for you. Are you using an external mic on your table or something, or an external camera?
We're in a university conference room, and there are mics in the room that amplify the.
Okay. When we came back to meeting in person, we tried to do the hybrid meetings for quite a while, and I end up being the tech person, even though I'm the president. And I hate that, because instead of going out and greeting people as they come, I'm stuck in the front with my back to everybody trying to get all the technology set up. But we just have a problem with, when we do both, then the speaker, if the speaker's virtual, they can't hear the questions from the audience that's live, and so we've tried different microphones, and we tried a conference microphone that sits on the table. That didn't work very well, and it's just kind of a hassle. we stopped doing the broadcasting on Zoom, a couple months ago.
There is a conference microphone called Owl. Have you tried that?
No, I'll have to write that one down and look at it. Thank you.
How did you feel that you heard us?
No, see, that's what I was impressed with, is that I could hear people asking questions and commenting in the room. That's why I asked you, because I knew you had to be using something different than what we used.
We can hear you great too. It's fantastic.
Well, yeah, and we had, with the church where we meet, we're fortunate enough that they have an internet connection and they have big screens and all of that. But it's just all we had to get adapters, and we had to get an extension cord for the HDMI, because we couldn't get far enough away from the wall it's a hassle.
We are very
So,
fortunate. We're very fortunate. To
yes.
helping us get this room in here, and
Yep.
it's very high tech stuff. So we're very grateful.
That's great. That's great. Well, the one advantage we have is that the pastor at the church where we meet has been a beekeeper for 40 years. So we get to have an apiary at the church. So we have our own teaching apiary for our new beekeepers. So that's kind of cool. But well, be happy to talk with you guys again, and hope you can get your bees all put away for the fall and have a good turnout next spring.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye, guys. Good night.